Hello, everyone. So wonderful that you're all able to join us tonight. I am Nazrin Himada. I'm curator here at Plug-in Institute of Contemporary Art, which is located on Treaty 1 territory, the territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Treaty 1 was signed in 1871, taking this territory from 7 local Anishinaabe First Nations in order to make the land available for settler use and ownership. Plug-in is an institution, and institutions are fraught places historically conditioned by the colonial structures that create them for settler use and ownership. Here at Plug-in, we are thinking and feeling through this as we recognize the ways in which art institutions may continue to contribute to the settler colonial narrative and embody its politic. As curator here, working at such an institution, I acknowledge the limitations that I might come up against, and I continue to ask myself, what are the commitments of Plug-in when it comes to decentering settler narratives and knowledge? What changes am I able to implement in my position? What are my responsibilities and priorities, and how are they motivated by the possibilities that open up when structural transformation is at the heart of the work that is to be done and that must be done? The art that I love is one that troubles our understanding of the world, one that shifts our ways of being in order to transform, work that moves us toward accountability, to be accountable to each other and to the promises we make, to put us to task in order to implement change. I hope, and in my capacity to do so, these changes will not be symbolic and are not reduced to superficial modes of inclusivity or diversity, but are concrete and ongoing. This means that as curator of Plug-in, I will continue to center the work of Indigenous artists, Black artists, artists of color, whose contribution to contemporary art is vast, has a long history, and continues to rock the foundations of colonial settler provenance. Here at Plug-in, we aim to showcase programs and exhibitions that not only challenge us or encourage us to ask questions differently, but move us toward new connections, collectivities, feelings never felt before, new imaginings of otherworldly existence that give life to possibility within what often seems impossible. So it is with great honor that I introduce our online event tonight as part of the 2020 Prairie Art Book Fair program. The fair is composed of 2 parts as a series of online readings, workshops, and events, which go until tomorrow evening, and as web pages compiling a selection of artists, writers, and publishers from the prairies and beyond that will be highlighted through the month of September and October. To explore the work of the 2020 Prairie Art Book Fair online exhibitors and to know more about our programming, please link to plugin.org. I also want to remind all our viewers tonight that you can ask questions through our Facebook chat, or you can email them to questions@plugin.org. Tonight is a very special evening as we are very honored to have with us the acclaimed Nishnaabeg writer, scholar, and musician, Leanne Betasamosake Simpson, a member of Alderville First Nation. She is the author of many seminal books, including This Accident of Being Lost, which has received many awards, such as the McEwen Book of the Year Award, as well as the Peterborough Arts Award for Outstanding Achievement by Indigenous Author. The book was a finalist for the Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize and the Trillium Book Award and was longlisted for CBC Canada Reads. Leanne's other powerful and influential books include, as we have always done, Islands of Decolonial Love, The Gift is in the Making, and Dancing on Our Turtle's Back. She has released 2 albums, including Flight, which is a companion piece to This Accident of Being Lost. To read Leanne's work is an act of decolonization, degentrification, and willful resistance to the perpetuation and dissemination of centuries-old colonial myth-making. It is a lived experience. It is a breaking open of the self to a world alive with people, animals, ancestors, and spirits who are all busy with the daily labors of healing not only themselves, but their individual pieces of the network of the web that connects them all together. Tonight, we'll hear Leanne read from her newest novel that just got published about a week ago, Noopiming, A Cure for White Ladies. Noopiming is Anishinaabe for In the Bush, and the title is a response to English-Canadian settler and author Susanna Moody's 1852 memoir, Roughing It in the Bush. So it is with great pleasure that I welcome Leanne. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Leanne, and for being part of our Prairie Art Book Fair programming.
Ani Kinawaya, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for those kind words, Nazrin. It's wonderful to be here visiting with you all virtually. So Noopiming, as you mentioned, is an Anishinaabe word that means in the bush. And I wanted to try and write something that was of a longer form. I have written a lot of short stories and a lot of poetry and lyrics, but I wanted to try something that was longer. And that would be a novel, but I had trouble connecting to the novel as a form because it's so steeped in Western literary traditions, and I am steeped in Anishinaabe oral traditions, and I had difficulty bringing those two things together, although there are Indigenous writers who do that very seamlessly. So Noopiming has a bunch of characters that I really fell in love with. Some of them are reoccurring characters from Islands of Decolonial Love and from This Accident of Being Lost. Some are new. They're multi-generational. Some are human, some are non-human. And they form a web of relationships that forms a world, an Anishinaabe world, that stretches across time and place and sort of would have been missed or erased by the worldview or the white supremacy of Susanna Moodie. So it's not sort of a critique of that book. It's almost, I use that book as a jumping off point into other worlds. The book came out on September 1st, and sort of in the lead up to the book, and during COVID, I was trying to figure out what literary festivals were going to look like and how to launch a book when everybody is trapped in their own houses. And so in my discussions with my sister, Ansley Simpson, who is a Anishinaabe Toronto-based musician, we decided to set a series of 4 readings to music. And so that's what I want to share with you tonight, 2 of those tracks. The whole thing is available on Bandcamp, and it is called the Noopiming Sessions. The first recording is called Solidification. It's from the very, very beginning of the novel. Ansley wrote this tremendously moving and performed a tremendously moving piece of music for the reading. And it introduces listeners or readers to the narrator, whose name is Mashkawaji. And Mashkawaji is an Anishinaabe word that means he or she or they are frozen. They're frozen in the ice. So this is the very beginning of the book, and that's the first reading. The second reading is called Mindimooyenh. Mindimooyenh is an Anishinaabe word that means old woman, or the one who holds everything together. And Mindimooyenh sort of plays that auntie, grandmother role in the book. They do a lot of funny things. They do a lot of odd things, and they have a very nervous energy about them. And that piece of music was co-written by Ansley Simpson and James Bunton. So we'll take a listen to those 2 readings now. Once you move through cold, there is Pacific. Once you move through Pacific, there is Placid. Once you move through Placid, there is a condition of expanse. And it was in that condition of expanse that held me. I heard them singing above me. Mashkawaji fell through the ice to find quiet, to get out of the wind, to visit with Namegos. They all sang. Mashkawaji stitches up the hole. They are so cold, they can't move. They are frozen stiff. The lake is their blanket. They all sang. Mashkawaji is frozen stiff, still, calm. No one knows if they're coming back. They all sang. Akiwenzii is fishing through the ice with a spear. They brought a line of beads. They will wait patiently. They will wait until Mashkawaji is done their visit. The singing and drumming came every night from a distance. Different choirs every evening at dusk, marking the passage of time, reminding me there is still love. You see, tragedy happened again. The details don't matter because the details are hopeless, overwhelmed, shut down. Know this, after 2 years, the best parts of me are still frozen in the lake. My limbic system, its best friend, the prefrontal cortex, and the hollow, pumping organ in which I keep benevolence. The only one that regularly comes to visit is Akiwenzii. In the winter, they park their truck on the ice, drill a hole with the auger and fish until the cold makes their bones crack. As soon as the ice is off the lake, Akiwenzii is back in their boat with a torch and a sort of pitchfork for spearing pickerel. In the dead of summer, Akiwenzii sneaks back before first light in their canoe, before their cottagers and their jet skis are out. In the fall, they sprinkle tobacco around me and sing. My world is muted. I look out. If something upsets me, I just wait, and the upset passes. I sit beside. Sometimes I remember the other me before I was frozen in the lake. I remember caring and engaging and the sharpness of unmuted feeling. I remember a hopeless connection. I don't feel stuck, in part because I don't feel anything. Their song isn't wrong. The ice is like a warm, weighted blanket. My form dissolved when tragedy came, and if I am fluid, the ice is container. There are ashes in my eyes. I am so far inside myself, like Mashkawaji on a full fast, inside time, pulled inside their organs, inside their turtle shell, inside the sediments of the lake, while the ice world forms on top, oblivious to the outside with body as lake. And there is solace in being cut off, and there is freedom enmeshed within that state. Know this, being frozen in the lake is another kind of life. Know this, it is unclear how long before I will be done with my visit. It is unclear how long visiting takes. Know this, visiting is more of a dance than an event. Akiwenzii is my will. Ninaatig is my lungs. Mindimooyenh is my conscience. Sabe is my marrow. Adik is my nervous system. Asin is my eyes and ears. Lucy is my brain. I believe everything these seven say because ice distorts perception and trust replaces critique, examination, interrogation. I believe everything these seven say, even though. I believe everything these seven say, even though their truths are their own, not mine. I believe in the absence of my own heart. I will accept the hearts of these seven. The geese fly overhead in the sheer grace of a carefully angled formation designed to take them elsewhere. There are still stars. There are still stars. Mindimooyenh counts their steps in their head every day, all day long. They also make lists on scrap paper, cut coupons, shop all the grocery store chains by taking the bus, studying the flyers, and buying only what is on special that week. All of their produce comes from the dead vegetable bin, which is the place in the grocery store where rotten fruit and vegetables are packaged up and sold for a discount. Mindimooyenh calls the specials bargoons. Nothing makes Mindimooyenh happier than a bargoon. Mindimooyenh does their work alone, except when it is a two per customer situation. Then we all get dragged to wait in separate lines with baggies full of loonies. One time, Mindimooyenh found a pair of ugly brown high-tech hiking boots for sale for $29.99 in the Marx Brothers Work Warehouse flyer. I say, it's just Marx. They say, I know. So they took the bus to the store, but when they got there, the Marx Brothers didn't have their size in the $29.99 model, only the $32.99 model. Mindimooyenh can afford the extra $3 easy. Instead, they get the $29.99 ones in a too small size because the sheer joy of the bargoon outweighs the pain of too small shoes. And who do I think I am waltzing around the reserve with shoes that cost $32.99 anyway? I just shut my feet off when they hurt, they say. Sometimes Sabe goes with Mindimooyenh, but Mindimooyenh is hard to keep up with, and the nervous energy is jolting and exhausting. In December of every year, Mindimooyenh wanders through IKEA in North York each day, meditating like it is a labyrinth. They repeat Gersby, followed by Hemnes over and over between the hours of 10 a.m. and 9 p.m. every day. They don't eat or drink except for $1.99 IKEA meatballs at 8:30 p.m. just before closing. Mindimooyenh takes the bus there and the bus home. They smudge in the parking lot before they go in. They put down their sema in the Fiscus elastica plant in the warehouse section. Mindimooyenh is sitting on a lawn chair on the ice, visiting me, talking and talking. It doesn't matter if you listen or pay attention or respond or talk back to them. And sometimes I like being around these people because it doesn't matter if I talk, not even one little bit. It doesn't even matter if I pay attention because my response is irrelevant. Mindimooyenh is like that. Maybe because all those years in residential school they weren't allowed to talk, and now their words have just built up and come bursting out. Mindimooyenh keeps their special things zippered into their front pocket. Fishing line and the needle, a baggie full of assorted buttons, nail clippers.
Sorry, I was muted there. I think we're back online. Thank you so much, Leanne, for those very beautiful recordings. Wondering if you want to say a little bit more about them first, before we delve into any discussion.
It was interesting for me to sit here and hear those words again, and to hear this was quite a different process for me than when I'm usually making an album. And so the words were written as part of this book, and the music was written independent, and to hear the two things come together, it's really interesting because I think they fit really well. And it's interesting that music always takes listeners on an emotional journey, independent of the lyrics. So that was interesting for me as sort of being in the audience. And I really, really love the idea of seeing where art or where novels or where work can travel, and how other artists connect to it or don't connect to it or interpret it. So the second or the third phase of this project is Sammy Chian, who is a Vancouver new media artist, is working on a visual interpretation of that piece that will be ready in a short while.
Amazing. Wow, thank you. Yeah, it was great to follow along in the book a little bit, and yeah, that was nice to hear the music in the background. And yeah, maybe I can even, just for our viewers, if you wanted to say a little bit of when was it always, did you always include music along with your books, or when did that become something that you started to do, or how you came to it?
With Islands of Decolonial Love, there was a companion piece that I was just working on sort of separately. And I had sent both pieces to John Sampson in Winnipeg with ARP Books. And it was his idea actually to marry the two projects because they were already so related. And I sort of was just at that point kind of playing around with the idea of commingling stories and narrative with sound. And I didn't know what I was doing yet or what I was trying to accomplish. So when this accident of Lost came along, I had been performing for a couple of years. I had a band. I was working with songwriters, and so flight again sort of naturally came along. But I wanted both projects to be able to stand alone artistically. So I didn't want the album to be reliant on the book, or the book to be reliant on the album. I wanted people to be able to encounter them and find meaning in them on their own. And so that was the idea for that. And then this sort of iteration until COVID. I am working on an album, and the album does share lyrics. It's called The Theory of Ice. It will be coming out in the winter on You've Changed Records with Stephen Lamke. But I was going to keep the two projects very, very separate. And then when COVID came along, there was this opportunity where I felt like first of all, I really needed to be doing something and making something and creating something. I know that's wasn't everybody's response, but I needed to be making art. And so the Noopiming session sort of happened. But I think in my life, I'm always, the kind of concepts I work with academically are the concepts I'm working with in the literary world, are the concepts that I'm working with musically. So it's very integrated for me. It's not sort of separate projects. It's just kind of me being me.
Yeah. Understand. Yeah. I do want to remind our viewers that you are welcome to ask questions in our Facebook chat if you're tuning in there. And if you're not tuning in there, we do have an email, questions@plugin.org, if you want to send them to that space as well. Leanne, I was wondering if you could talk, I mean, I'm personally interested, and because we're in a kind of art book fair context, wondering about how you your experience with experimenting with form specifically, and I feel like you've got such an eclectic way of getting into the writing and presenting it in certain ways in different books and in your different publications. So, and even in this one in Noopiming, I feel like it seems that you can enter in at any point, because poetry, and then it's prose, but then it's also these amazing one-liner, these amazing one-liners that I feel like one of the characters, sorry, I'm just trying to find it now. I just found it earlier and I was like, oh, I really want to bring this up. But it seems, yeah, that you give with the one-liners, just having a whole page kind of only be for this one line is also giving us space to kind of think and really condition a type of slowness in the reading too, maybe, or a pause. And I just wondered if you wanted to talk a bit about that.
You're the first person who's said that to me, that you could sort of jump in at any point in this story in the book. And that for me is like a tremendous compliment, because I sort of that was one of my intentions. I wanted you to be able to jump into the story and almost have the story being told in a circle or a spiral, where every time you go through it, the meaning deepens. Mm-hmm. And that's really coming from an Anishinaabe aesthetics of layering and having things taking place in the physical world, things taking place in the spiritual world, and this aesthetic of repetition being very important, where you hear the same stories through ritualized practice and ceremonies over and over and over again throughout your life. And you see how, because of the relationality and because of where you are in your life and what you're bringing to the story, the meaning shifts. And so that's an interesting concept for me. I think I always start out thinking that I'm going to write a short story or poetry. And then I get very drawn to the interstitial spaces because those are just very, very generative spaces for me. And I think that the structure of my life has been such that I've been able to sort of sink into those interstitial spaces and try to communicate meaning from that space.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I'm wondering too, because it's something I think about often in my own work, in my own writing, and also just in my curating as well. Just thinking about, especially for BIPOCs, thinking a lot about the term lived experience. And I know mentioned in the write-up, and I really was just out of curiosity to know more about how you feel about that term, or how does it connect to you in terms of how it also in some ways develops into form in your writing too, that it's always different and it's always coming from you're providing us different perspectives when it comes into your books, and stories that you tell.
I think that lived experience has been a really important source of knowledge for me in terms of knowledge production, but I don't like just staying in the place of a lived experience. So I don't like just journaling, or not just journaling or memoir. They're completely beautiful and valid forms. But for me, I like to take that lived experience and kind of process it and think about it collectively, think it through with people, think it through with characters, put it in dialogue with other people's experience or other beings' experience, and see if I can kind of get generate some other knowledge about what's going on structurally, or what's going on theoretically, or what's going on in a bigger sense, in a collective sense. So I feel like it's a very, very rich body of knowledge, and not just that lived experience, but Diane Millian talks about felt theory, like the emotional, the body, the embodied response to that. So, yeah.
Thank you. And in that, I'm wondering, if you wanted to also tell us more about, I feel like you do it in such a beautiful and fruitful way of really bringing us into the life of non-human life. Yeah. But bringing us very close to that in terms of just the way that you write about plants and landscape and weather and all of that.
So I think I spend a lot of time on the land, and I'm one of those people that feels really grounded and really calm and really well taken care of when I'm in the bush. And so I think over time, it's a place that I would retreat to if I'm feeling anxious or if I'm feeling any kind of big emotions or going through any kind of life transition. And so I think that in this book, I sort of took that idea of making that a practice. And what is it, if over time you go and you visit the same tree and you have a relationship with this tree, and you incorporate that relationship into your life as a being and as an embodied relationship, telling stories about that tree or about those caribou or about that river then becomes part of your life and part of the way that you move through the world. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about my relationship with Ninaatig, or the maple tree, which is a character in the book. This idea that in my territory, these are probably my oldest ancestors. They've been in this place for 4 centuries, some of them. And what have they witnessed in terms of the changes over the last hundreds of years? And what is it like for them to have me, or to have me and my kids come and visit them? What sort of perspectives and what sort of lived experience do these beings have that I'm sharing space with, that I'm sharing land with, that I'm sharing breath with?
Absolutely. The character that I was referring to before is Mindimooyenh. And I really I felt like they had such a great sense of humor in the book, and was wondering, just if you can tell us more about them as a character and how they function in the book.
So they're one of the older characters in the book. Mindimooyenh means old woman, or the one who holds everything together. They've seen some shit, and they know how to live life. And so they make these kind of humorous interventions and humorous observations for what seems to be normal for everybody else, or we're all sort of normal for all of us. It's been normalized in contemporary life that seems absolutely ridiculous to them. So at the same time, they're holding space and they're supporting these younger characters and younger community members to self-actualize and to figure out their gifts in life and their path in life. And so at the same time, there's also this very loving, very caring, very present sort of commitment and responsibility on the part of that character. And so I like this idea of the relationality between different generations and between different lived experiences.
Thank you. I guess we don't have any questions yet from the audience. I'm not seeing them yet, but there is a comment. These recordings are such a beautiful way to experience this writing. Thank you, Leanne.
Thank you for those kind words.
I'm wondering if you're just from thinking through the different ways in which I feel I guess in which I feel for myself personally, but also to think through it with others. Just, I know you had mentioned that COVID had created a space for you to be more in some ways more in tune or connected to making art, and I know, and as you had mentioned, many people it didn't that was doing quite the opposite. But I'm wondering just about your process as a writer, and how you come to develop the stories that you do when you do, and if there is something, I guess, any advice for writers out there, if there's something you'd like to say.
I think my advice for writers is to sort of find what you need to write and protect the parts of you that enable you to create art or to write, because I think there's a lot of things in the world that can, particularly for Indigenous writers and Black writers, people of color, there's a lot of harm that the colonial world has in store for us, and that can really shut down things like being vulnerable, being in touch, being embodied, being in touch with emotions, and being in touch with creative energy. I think our lives are also really complicated, and so finding things like emotional space in your life to be able to create is something that's also a challenge. So I know that it's going to be very different for everybody, and you know, when you have some writer's block and you're up at night Googling how to break through that, there's always these very definitive lists. But for me, there's never been a key to unlocking that. I know that I have to take very good care of myself, mentally and emotionally and physically. I know that I have to create space in my life to be able to have time to process and write. I know that I need to live a really interesting life. I need to be busy. And so prior to COVID, though, I was traveling a lot. I was doing a lot of guest speaking internationally and in the US. And so the transition between early March to late March was really drastic for me, as it was for all of us. And then I think, of course, with artists, when you have all of a sudden you have this block of unstructured time, which is so rare, you don't want to waste it. But there was also so many other things going on for all of us that it was difficult to sort of get going. So I think what I would say, the most important thing for writers is to protect the part of you that can create. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Protect it with everything. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a good reminder. Sure. We are getting a lot of comments of how much people are enjoying the conversation, and have already received one question as well. Is there a time in your life when the story or voice of a non-human being surprised you, and then you wrote about it?
Was there a time in my life where non-human beings surprised me? I think there's been so many times, because I think part of modern contemporary life is that we're very, very busy and we're not paying attention. We're not paying attention to things like sunrises and sunsets and the phase of the moon. We're not paying attention to the animals that are coming to visit our urban backyards. And that was something that of course came up when we all started to be in lockdown, and we slowed down, and there was all of these animal encounters that emerged. So I think I'm being constantly surprised and inspired by the plant and the animal worlds, constantly learning things from those beings. And I think it's a really important practice. It's also a really tricky practice to be present for that.
Thank you. Another question: what inspires you to write your poetry albums, books, or is there anyone you look up to specifically?
There's so many people I look up to. There's so many people in Indigenous communities on the reserve who have just embody a humility that is so beautiful to me, that are sort of knowledge holders and makers, and storytellers. outside of sort of the realm of performance and recognition. And I think I get a lot of positive energy from those folks. I think that I got really interested in performance because I noticed at one point in my life, after giving birth to my children, actually, that as an academic and as an intellectual, I spent a lot of time in my head from here up. And as a writer, you can spend all of your time in your head as well. And so this act of giving birth, you can't really intellectualize your way out of that or through that. You can't really stay in your head. Your body doesn't allow that. And so I started to think about how Indigenous life was very much embodied. It's very much about movement. It's very much about making things. You can't survive in the bush if you just read books and think. And so I wanted to kind of challenge myself to get myself back into my body, to get myself comfortable in my body, and to get myself comfortable in front of a microphone connecting, because it's space and it's time and transforming space and time and working with an audience to create an energy and to create connections is something that I've written about. But as the academic, the artist was like, well, wouldn't it be wonderful to kind of try to create that in real time, in little kind of bubbles, little kind of islands of decolonial love. So that was very, very challenging for me to begin that journey. And that's how the kind of storytelling and music evolved.
I just remembered that you did this incredible interview with Wanda Nanabush and Rebecca Belmore. I think it was before Rebecca's opening at the AGO in Toronto. And then I noticed that you also chose a piece of her work for the cover of your book.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you want to talk about the decision or if you wanted to talk about Rebecca's work.
Rebecca's work she has been someone that I really look up to, and someone that has inspired me, particularly her performances. She comes in to this space from a place of power. She transforms the space, she transforms the body, she transforms herself. It feels, when I'm watching a performance, it feels like she's inside me, showing me things from the inside out. And so I think that I've spent a lot of time thinking about her work and experiencing her work. And it seemed like a very, very good fit. It was a good fit for this accident of being lost, because there's an image of hers that is also on the cover. And it seemed like a really good fit for this book. Because again, it added the visual art of that image adds another layer of meaning to the words, and it's another way of having that work travel and see where it goes.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience. I'm enjoying this discussion very much. I had the opportunity to use Leanne's work on story in a course I taught on contemporary theory, and it really connected with many of the students. So maybe that was more of a comment than a question.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for using my work with students.
Yeah, I feel like I think I'm not sure how to articulate this so clearly, but I feel like a lot of when I engage with your work, Leanne, especially your stories and your prose, I guess for me, it's very moving, just as someone who is not Anishinaabe or non-Indigenous, that I still feel connected to it in a very strong way, in terms of how it helps me think through, reminding me just of what my values are, reminding me of what my priorities are, and also really connecting me to just thinking through what writing can do, I think. for lack of a better term, like politically, just in terms of how one can really be engaged with writing in a way that conditions transformation in some way. And so I feel like that's something I really appreciate about your work. I guess it's just more of a comment really also than a question, but that's something I think about often when I do engage with your stories, especially. Yeah. And I think I started, my first encounter with your work was Islands of Decolonial Love. That was my first entry into your work.
I started writing very much wanting to center Anishinaabe people and Indigenous people as the audience first, not exclusively, but first. So I wanted Anishinaabe people in our experiences and Indigenous people in our experiences. I wanted them to be able to see, wanted us to be able to see ourselves in the book, because that's something that white people get all the time, but it's not something that we get. And I think the beautiful part of that was that people of color and Black people and other folks that are engaged in anti-colonial struggles around the world, that was also a window in, and an affirmative way in. And then I think it was also good for white people, because the experience of reading something where you're not centered is something that we've all had lots of experience with. But I remember speaking to a class and having white students be very troubled by this idea that they weren't the intended audience. So I think that's also, I think that opens up a whole world of writing. And there's lots of other Black and Indigenous writers that are doing this. When we write on our own terms, we are opening up different ways of doing things and different ways of storytelling and different storytelling aesthetics and different storytelling traditions. And I think that that's a very, very good thing for audiences. I don't think that we should have to whitewash or dumb our work down. I think that does a disservice to white audiences and to the diversity of Can Lit. So I think it's exciting to see writers that are sort of breaking through those boundaries and doing things in a way that makes sense and that is meaningful to us. And then to see these larger audiences connect to it on our terms, that's a good feeling. That feels like something that's meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think of Norbese Phillips' work as well, and I know you just did a
right
or two where you read each other's works, and it was really quite beautiful. Yeah. There's another question from the audience. There is a passage in the book that talks about protected sacred sites, and that rather than being left alone, they need constant attention and intervention to maintain their sacred nature. I found it very touching, and I want to ask if you'd like to talk about this notion of care.
Yeah, so this comes from my experience in my own homeland. We have an area that's sacred to us, that's Teaching Rocks. And I know in Manitoba, there's also lots of sites in Noopiming Provincial Park as well. And the provincial parks, or the sort of Western way of preserving sites that they deem important, involves buildings, and it involves climate, and it involves protection. And for us, I think we see these sacred places as a relationship. And we have lots of teachings about maintaining relationships, because that's the foundation of our interactions with living things on planet Earth. It's the building block of healthy families, of healthy intimate relationships, of healthy communities, and of healthy international relations. So this idea that we extend a lot of care, a lot of presence, a lot of listening, and we actively have an embodied relationship with these sites is different than this idea of kind of putting them in a museum or preservation. It's a living, breathing relationship that then has a fluidity to it, then can change with different kinds of circumstances, but it's a practice. And a lot of things in Indigenous cultures are practices. And if you don't engage in that practice, then you lose that relationship, or that relationship becomes weakened or imbalanced. So, yeah, and I really wanted to focus on this idea of care and kindness and gentleness, and living your life in a way that sort of minimizes harm. I wanted the characters to really embody that practice, because so much of Indigenous life under colonialism is violent, and it's harmful, and it's horrible. And just as an Indigenous reader, I sometimes don't want to read that because I have to live that. So I wanted to also provide sort of a space where we could, as Norbesi says, breathe and find some joy and find some humor and really center that care and kindness.
Beautiful. Wow, thank you. We have another question from the audience. How does Leanne protect the feelings, vulnerability, while demonstrating strength, such a challenge as a BIPOC woman? What tips can Leanne safely share that can offer ways to not fall into the angry Black/Indigenous women trope when creating?
Well, first of all, I think it's fine and healthy and normal for Indigenous people and Black people and BIPOC folks to be angry. We have a lot to be angry about, and I think that's a healthy sort of expression. I have a very strict boundary around what's public and what's private, and I feel that I've learned the hard way that it's very important for me to have emotionally processed everything that I'm going to be sharing public, and to maintain those boundaries, because I think particularly in the era of the internet, it can be very, very difficult to protect yourself, and it can be very difficult to protect the parts of you that can create. So I really think that for me, everything that I'm writing about, I no longer feel vulnerable about. I am no longer processing. There isn't really anything people can say to me that is going to destroy me. That doesn't mean I don't have vulnerabilities and that I don't have things that I'm working through. It's just that it's not a safe thing for us to be processing that grief or those big emotions in a white supremacist society.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. Can you talk about how this book responds to Suzanne Moody's? Is it in direct response or more of a jumping off point?
It's more of a jumping off point. I think the title, like Noopiming, and putting it in my language and having it in the bush. Susanna Moody wrote some really horrific racist things, depictions of Mississauga Indians or Mississauga and Anishinaabe, my people, in the book. She has some pretty horrible anti-Black passages in the book. But beyond that, she's a white woman who is coming into my territory, steeped in heteropatriarchy, steeped in capitalism, steeped in white supremacy, and not seeing all of the Anishinaabe worlds, the plant worlds, the animal worlds, the worlds of Black folks, not seeing them, just erasing them, and then living in a way that destroys them as part of a structure that is intent on destroying them. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time. I've done a little bit of critiquing of her work in the academic book, as we have always done, but I didn't want to spend a lot of time focused on her or that. I wanted to write something in spite of that, and to write something beautiful and amazing and full of humor and joy that would be the antidote or the cure for that white lady. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time thinking about her and what she was doing in my territory. There's actually no white ladies in the book, which is the cure.
Amazing. Leanne, I just wanted to check in to see there's one more audience question I can take if you wanted.
Sure.
Yeah. You mentioned the form of the novel wasn't suitable for you, especially for Noopiming with its fragmentary form, as oral storytelling is how you learn and carry forward the knowledge of your elders and community. I'm wondering what the act of writing with this back knowledge of oral storytelling does to this knowledge and way of processing narrative when it becomes text.
That's a brilliant question, and it's something that I think about all the time. And I love the oral tradition, and I think that we need to put as much presence and as much energy into the oral tradition as we do the written tradition, because you're right, it does change it. It's now there is now a form, whereas if I was telling this story orally, I could change it based on the audience. I could change it based on how I'm feeling. I could correct the mistakes. The story would grow with me. I would tell it in a different way over time. Other people might hear it and tell it. And so it travels through the world in a different way. It uses a different set of aesthetics to imbue the story with meaning. It's an experience when you hear an oral story. You have to pay, there's a set of skills. You have to pay an incredible amount of attention. You can't zone out even for a second, or you might miss something. You can't go back and read a section again. So what I wanted to do was to sort of take some of the aesthetics and some of the beautiful parts of the oral tradition and embody them while I was writing this story. So it's definitely a literary work that's really, I think, inspired by the oral tradition, but I don't think it can replace the oral tradition. And I think that, that the beauty of storytelling around a fire is something that's just something that's very, very intimate and very special in a way of generating knowledge and connecting us. It's a way of belonging.
Amazing. That's a really beautiful note to end on. And I'm wondering, Leanne, if you have any other comments you wanted to make before we end the broadcast.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Nazrin, for your amazing questions and your level of engagement. Thank you to the audience for your questions and for reading the book. And I hope that everyone is safe and healthy and has a really good transition into fall and winter.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you so much, Leanne, for making the time. And I just wanted to acknowledge a few more people who are, the fair is a collective effort, the work of so many people behind the scenes, including Luther Kanedu, who's Plugins Public Program Coordinator, Erin Josephson Laidlaw, our Operations Manager, Madeline Defoe, our Communications Coordinator, and who's also is the one who designed the web pages for each exhibitor, and Allison Yearwood, our Executive Director. I also want to thank Colby and Scott from Collective Broadcast for facilitating our online live stream tonight and for creating this platform to be together. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. Please don't forget to join us again tomorrow night at 7:30 for a screening and discussion with Patterns Collective. They'll be showcasing the work of Dave Oboro, a filmmaker, photographer, and producer based in Lagos, Nigeria, who will also be part of the discussion. Please do check out the exhibitors for this year's fair and our lineup of our programming this weekend at plugin.org. Thank you and good night.